Africa is very diverse. It's very different from one country to another. You will find very different level of development and very different level of democracy and openness. You have some countries that are on the top list, definitely. I can name a few, like you have Rwanda, you have Botswana, you have Ghana, to some extent even South Africa, that are doing well in terms of economic growth, economic development. The main issue is to ensure that that economic growth is inclusive. It's not only for a small part of the population, but it's a huge part of the population.
The bad news is that there is an increase of violence and unrest in Africa at the moment, but there are some countries that are doing much worse now than they were 5 years ago. Countries like Burundi, for example, are an example of that in Central Africa.
Some of the main security threats we've noticed in Africa are really linked to the political conditions that we have. We still have huge issues related to power struggle, linked to democracy issues and human rights issues. We're really trying, again, to reinforce the democracy, to reinforce governance, so that we have societies that are stable enough to implement a political agenda without having to go from a disagreement to a violent war.
We see a variety of actions from the United Nations, from the African Union, from governments bilaterally in terms of trying to attempt to create that situation where peace will be sustainable. But the challenge in that sense is that often those responses are not really based on the evidence of what actually works. So we see a long process of try and error, where we often fail in the responses that we have. But also in a way that it requires that all of those responses from an international point of view are better coordinated to what is actually coming from the countries themselves. Peace building is not an external action. External actors support processes that are national. And that mind shift is very important for us to ensure sustainability.
The role of international community, of course, has been funding the activities in Somalia. It has been trying to help the government operate, the current government, and the peace talks. They have been funding all this. Yeah, the role of international community, we can say it's both positive and negative. Positive in that it has provided funds, it has given sanctions to Somalia. Negative in that they do it their own way. They don't do it the Somali way. We have had conferences, one after the other. We have had signing of agreements, one after the other. But we are not yet in peace. I mean, the Somali people really do not feel like they are on their own.
The longer-term risks really lie on the demographics of Africa. It's the youngest continent in the world. By 2050, the third largest country in the world will be Nigeria. By 2100, with population growth, 10 of the 20 largest countries in the world by population will be African. So the question has to be, how can Africa sustain such large population growth? Where are the jobs going to be for the young people? Diversifying the economies of Africa, so it's not just about extraction, exporting raw materials to Europe, China, United States and elsewhere. So those are part of the story. The difficult part, I think, is that even if you had 7 or 8% growth rates in Africa over the next 20 years, that's not enough with the population projections. Really important issue for Europe, because we're going to see more migration from Africa to Europe, not less migration. And there'll be more migration inside Africa also. That's partly by population pressure, but it also overlaps with climate change.
Without development, we cannot talk of peace and security, and vice versa. It goes hand in hand, and if these different countries don't find a way of bringing it together, it will remain unstable, and we will still see more and more issues of violence and uprising in the future.
A lot of the solutions to African crises are African. They're African solutions. But some of the crises are becoming globalized. For example, some of the radicalization that's taking place is about globalization, and it is about radicalization from the Middle East and elsewhere, Islamic State, Al-Qaeda. And those are African problems that will need global solutions. Africa on its own won't be able to solve them. It shows how partnership is going to have to be increasingly important, but much more Africa-led, not being prescribed by Europe or by America. And that's the difference, I think, that we're now seeing. More humility and deeper understanding for solutions.